Hello, survivors. Welcome to the State of Decay 2 stream. I'm your host, Geoffrey Card, and welcome to our first stream of 2023. We've got an exciting year planned for you all with the infestation update on the horizon, and in fact, Joe Swarner is going to tackle that topic in a couple of weeks in his first stream of the year. But right now, we've got something else going on. We have got a guest. This is KAT WEIS, a programmer on State of Decay 2. Hello, Kat.
Hey. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's great to have you on here. We worked together mostly on the Homecoming update back when I was on the State of Decay 2 team. But since then, you have remained there while I've, gone and done different things. And so you and I actually have not caught up much in a while. So it's going to be great to talk to you, even if we have to do it in front of a few hundred or 1,000 people. I hope you're feeling okay about that.
It'll be good. It'll be great.
So, so over the next hour, we're going to be chatting with Kat about programming in the game industry, like her career, where she came from, any advice for aspiring programmers out there. So be thinking about your questions about that, funnel them to us. Our moderators are standing by. At the same time, though, I'm also going to be playing the game because, we've rolled over to a new month, and right now, there is a new bounty pack available. So we're over here right in front of Cash Beaumont, and we're going to check out the Bundle Up pack.
Hello, my friend.
So
Here are my available bounties.
we're going to talk about his available bounties. So I've been looking over these. There's a nice selection of items you can get in the Bundle Up pack. In fact, I've got a little graphic for them right here. There's the Fire Poker, the Ice Axe, the Antler Knife, the Producer Pistol, and the M9. So with all of these options at my disposal, I think what I want to do, we've got killing 5 armored Zeds in close combat, which is pretty straightforward, easy thing to do. The hard part is finding the zombies. Killing a Juggernaut with a pistol, you don't have to do all of the damage with the pistol, luckily, so that should actually work. And then I think killing ferals with explosives is a particularly difficult one, so I'm going to try to get that one done too.
Alas, parting is such sweet sorrow.
So you're going to see me working on that, but that's not really the subject. That's just the background noise that we're going to be doing during the stream. The real topic is that we've got Kat here, and we want to learn about gameplay programming. So let's start with sort of the simple, straightforward question. Like, what drove you to want to be a game programmer? Like what put you on that career path in the first place?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because as a kid, I was one of those kids that had no idea what they wanted to do growing up.
Same.
And I hadn't figured that out until like senior year of high school. And it was like, oh, hey, me finally realizing that if I really enjoy video games, somebody has to make video games. And it turns out my mom had actually done a lot of programming in college, so she really encouraged me to like go into that. And so I actually took a couple of programming classes in my high school and found out that it made a lot of sense to me. So I ended up going to school for that, and I did that in college, and specifically focused around video games because I always thought, fun, cool thing to do, work on video games. Didn't realize how hard it was.
Right, yeah. When people, hear that I work on video games, their first guess is that we just spend all of our time playing video games. And like, that insight that you had that somebody actually has to make them is not something that occurs to everyone initially. It's almost like they just spring out of the ether and people just enjoy them.
Yeah. No, I mean, I didn't think about that for years. So
yeah,
I'm totally in that camp of I didn't think about it until I was like, oh, wait. There's a way that these work, and I could figure out how to make those work and do that as a living, which I do now, which is crazy.
Yeah, I know, right? It's you get almost, this sense of like, why do I get to do this thing that I've wanted to do my entire life? That just seems weird. It seems like that's not how life is supposed to go occasionally.
Yeah.
But so one of the, when you talked about realizing that programming was a thing you could actually do, that's actually not all that common. I mean, I've looked into, learning, how to program, how to like learn programming languages and things like that. And while I can handle sort of the basic logic that like level designer, scripter tools, those kinds of things that I did as a level designer, things that I did as a gameplay scripter, I can handle that. Once you get into programming in like C++, it's arcade. Like computers think in a way that are just different from a human being. And like, was it a difficult transition, or were you one of the people for whom like when you saw, you're like, oh wait, no, this actually kind of makes sense, and it just clicked for you at a young age?
So the funny thing about programming is that it's really easy to be like, oh yeah, it clicked for me, because a lot of the stuff really did click to me for me because it was simple, straightforward kind of instructions that you're giving the computer. But there are other parts that I found significantly less intuitive. I found those later down the path line, or the I took me a long time to wrap my head around how multi-threading works and how certain things can be doing the same thing at the same time, but that causes risk in making sure that no two things are trying to edit the same thing at the one time, and that gets all really complicated. So that took me a really long time, and I mean, I'm still learning all the time. I'm learning, and there's so much to learn in programming and game design in general.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we're such a, the video games in general are such a nascent field. It's like every 10 years, the game industry is completely different the way it works. And so, I mean, we're probably both going to spend our entire careers just learning new things, which is actually one of the things I like about a career in games, is the fact that it changes so fast. It doesn't get dull. You never hit a point where you're like, oh, well, I've figured it all out. I'm done.
Right. You're like, oh, I finished this thing. Oh, here's something that's completely and utterly different. Like, you're still using code to solve a problem, but the problem is so vastly different than the last one you're working on that it never really gets too boring, which is really nice, and something that is another reason that I was very much attracted to doing this as a job.
Okay, so you said that you took some code classes in high school, and that's where you first sort of realized that, yeah, you've got the bug, like you've got the thing in your head that makes it so that programming can be a fun career for you. But then, like, there's probably people in our audience who would love to be gameplay programmers and who are wondering, like, what should I do? What education should I get? So what was the whole process that you went through, and would you advise other people do it the way you did, or would you tell people they should do something else?
I think, there's quite a few different paths you can take, and no path is right or wrong unless it's right or wrong for you. Personally, like I said, I did some coding in high school, not near enough coding to know what I was doing. Like, this was like making like a really bad website and like making it do some really terrible like animations and stuff. But I actually went to college and got a degree, Bachelor's of Science in Game Design and Development, which was very much focused around programming for games. Though I did do some classes that didn't have any coding at all, or it was part of it but not all of it, and stuff like that. But I think that really worked really well for me because I enjoyed having the structure of doing it in college, where it was, here a teacher teaches you some things and then tells you to go practice or do this project to make sure that you know what you're doing, right? And it also allowed me to meet a bunch of people who wanted to do the same things and work together in groups to actually make a whole bunch of prototypes of games and such. But I think you don't need to go to college to learn how to program, and you don't need to go to college to know how to program games. But for me, it helped because it gave me, I didn't have to totally like discipline myself and do all of these things. I didn't have to like go out and find people like in my area who were total strangers and try and get them to make a game with me. Because making a game on your own, some people do it and it's extraordinarily impressive, but it's extraordinarily difficult. And I wouldn't advise it, especially if it's your first couple of times making a game, because you will get to the point where you just get stuck and you don't really know what to do until you go talk to somebody else and it's like, this is a problem I'm having and I don't know how to fix it. And like, you can do some of that through the internet, but I think it definitely helps to have other people to work with and do all of the like collaboration and helping. Even just like, I've been staring at this code for so long, something's wrong with it, but I don't know what. The second you show it to somebody, they point it out and you're like, oh my God, yeah, that could have saved me like 3 hours.
Yeah. Or the second you show it to somebody, you immediately notice the problem that you didn't notice when you were looking at it by yourself. So you mentioned, doing projects with other people, and actually that's one thing. So I'm an old man, and I came up right before the time when there actually started being, like design and game development degree programs in school. And so when those first started showing up, one thing that impressed me about them was the amount of portfolio building a lot of the good programs do, where they're not just teaching you a bunch of skills and putting you through a process of learning how to program in sort of an abstract way, but they also put you together on teams and have you make stuff together. And actually, which kind of gives you a little bit of parity with people who do, sort of do stuff by themselves. Because if you don't go to school, the thing you're trying to create is a bunch of examples of games that you've worked on. Then you can show to other people and say, hey, look, I made this. You should hire me. But they also do that in the school programs too, right? You actually make games that are playable.
Oh, yeah. The first proper game that I ever really made that was totally decided what we were gonna do and had to scope it and build it ourselves was only a year or so after I had started programming, which meant that it wasn't the most impressive thing. Obviously, it's a bit of a glitch fest, but it was really interesting because we kind of tried to make a 2D version of Portal, kind of.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
If you're gonna set your programming sites, reasonably, Portal is not necessarily the target, but 2D Portal is actually a good idea. If you're gonna make, I guess Portal originally was a student project. It was a student project by crazy people. But doing 2D, that actually sounds like a really good move.
Yeah, it was pretty much basically we were set up in a way that we had been mostly taught how to work in this 2D environment that was set up. So we were like, okay, let's just do 2D. Let's not try and figure out how 3D works just yet. And let's keep it simple as a small amount of levels. I think we ended up with 5 puzzle levels, roughly. But it was still so difficult. I remember because I had decided, I'll be the one who's in charge of basically you fire a gun and it teleports you to where the bullet lands.
Okay. And
I was like, I can do that. And then I was like, okay, but what if you shoot it into a corner? The person doesn't fit in the corner. And it's okay. So you have to push them out of all of the geometry. And make sure, and then it got even more complicated because I had the bright idea again, setting myself up for some difficulties where I decided that we should add moving platforms into the game. And then I now had to deal with, okay, you shot it against this platform's moving now, so make all of those calculations correctly to put you in the right place. And it was I think a lot in video games, it's easy to say, oh, this will be simple. And then you do it and you're like, this is not simple at all.
I just got a feral with explosives. Just had to say that out loud.
Congratulations.
You usually have to hit them twice, which is kind of the challenge there. But yeah, so it's interesting though. You're right. What you're pointing out about how it's really easy to just imagine something you could do in the real world, right? If you were designing a game to play with your friends on the playground, all of the problems of physics are just handled for you. Physics just happens, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, right.
But in a game, every single little problem like that, what happens if it's on a moving platform, even just figuring out what the player expects is does the player expect you to teleport to the platform as though your bullet's stuck to the platform? Or do they expect themselves to land in the position the bullet landed, even if the platform has moved on? Which one does the player expect? If you, for instance, try to drive between two cars, do you expect your car to flip up into the air? No one expects that, but that's what happens. It's figuring that stuff out is you have to think through every single tiny thing, and just learning that is a weird mental process to go through. So I should probably take a question from the chat at some point. Let me look through here. Okay, so we've had actually a few questions, both from Twitter and from our current chat, about sort of your work on State of Decay 2. So Superflick, for instance, wants to know, what was the most difficult part or thing to program in the Homecoming update? Now, I'm actually, I know a couple. I don't know the whole list of things you worked on in the Homecoming update. I'm aware that not everything you worked on in the Homecoming update actually ended up shipping with the update through no fault of yours, just through logistical decisions outside of your work. So I'm curious. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you did on the Homecoming update, and we can get into both the published and unpublished features.
Sure. Yeah. So the Homecoming update was like the first big update that I worked on here at Undead Labs, and I did a lot of work to support, because when we were doing Homecoming, which involved the return to Trumbull Valley, we wanted to do a lot narratively, right? So we were doing a lot of new stuff with missions. So there was a lot of actual engineering support that had to go in to allow those missions to happen, like to allow you to set it so that this is the objective that causes the mission to advance, because we just didn't have support for that before.
Yeah.
Or I think there was one about like saving missions that are partially in progress, and like so making sure that they are completable when you like restart up again. And that was rather complex and interesting, because our mission system is very different from any other system that I've like interfaced with before.
Yeah,
So-
that's true. We kind of designed it specifically for the weird situation that State of Decay 2 created, which was we just wanted a lot of random missions all the time to be able to spawn things in random places and just to always constantly be different. That was what we prioritized over everything else. And then when we did Heartland, we needed a completely different, very linear mission system, which we did. And then for Homecoming, we needed something partway in between, where it wasn't linear, it still had to follow the same rules as the mission system from the rest of State of Decay 2, but it was still, like you were saying, like we couldn't just lose entire threads because the player quit the game at the wrong time. So like just every single version of State of Decay 2's storytelling was just a different nightmare. And actually, we've got actually another sort of a question which you might want to tackle at the same time. Let's see, who was it that said this? Oh yeah, so Sidechat the Gray asked, what is it like working on a game in 2023 that came out in 2018 and has a ton of legacy code? And actually, we had got really similar questions from Bernardo Becerra del Alamo and from Azu, who just wanted to, like, what's it like to join a team where the game already works one way and now you've got to make new things happen on top of a ton of legacy code that works a different way?
It is so interesting. I could say it's bad, but that's not the full picture, because the full picture is having an existing big behemoth kind of code base does allow you to kind of go and look and see how things are kind of built to get an idea of what will work and what won't, which is definitely very helpful at times. But there are also like big legacy systems that were implemented one way back when the game launched, because that was how it had to be implemented for any variety of reasons. And maybe that decision was made by somebody who's not even at the company anymore, so you can't even ask them why they made that decision, So you're like, okay, so if I change this, everything should be fine. And then you accidentally make a bug because you didn't know about the way something ties in with something else.
Yeah, there were like 3 other features that were assuming that feature would work a certain way, and then it didn't.
Yeah. So it can be frustrating. I think probably an example that a lot of people could understand is that currently we're reworking the infestations mechanic in the public Tels realm, and me and one of the other engineers are just fantasizing about the day we get to go in and rip out all of the old code, like the old code of how it used to work, because right now we have to maintain both the old version and the new version, and that makes it so much more complicated to like hunt down bugs or like read through the code and understand what's going on. So we're both very much looking forward to the day where we can just go in and remove a ton of code. That's like every engineer's dream. It's to just spend a day removing code.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually, yeah, because there's some, like, you really learn sort of the beauty of efficiency when you're working with, oh, crap! Oh, these guys are working together! Oh, these monsters! Anyway, you really start to learn, sort of the beauty of efficiency. Your brain is constantly looking for more efficient ways to do things. And so having this huge spaghetti-like code base you're working with is probably, like, just probably just annoys certain parts of your brain. Ah, dang it! I keep killing this guy a little early because I panic.
I see Zoe's in the chat.
Oh yeah, what's Zoe saying?
Zoe says, "It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me."
Well, that's the thing. It's like a lot of the time, the job you're given as a programmer, is to not necessarily make something work the best way, but to make it work quickly. You know, because you've got some deadline you've got to meet. You've got to do it in the cheapest, quickest way possible in order to get it in there. But then that's not always going to be the most future-proof way. And then later on, the developer who has to work on top of that code base, they're sitting there cursing you, but they weren't in the situation that you were in when you're the one who built it originally. They don't get it. So yeah, it's nice to have the luxury of being able to sort of like really spend time on each phase of developing a game, so you can actually try to do each thing the right way. But even when you're in the perfect scenario, you never know what the right way is until after you've done it wrong. You just never really know.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't mention this earlier, but the best way to teach yourself how to make games is just to make games and make different kinds of games and make terrible games, because they're gonna be terrible. Most of my games that I made were terrible and never saw the light of day beyond a few close friends and family members and the people at school who are like critiquing it and stuff. So it's like, fail, because failure will teach you far more than success will. But also try new things, try things that you don't understand or that you think are simple, so you can figure out how they actually work. And that just gives you more and more experience and stuff. So
yeah, like look at failures and potential failures, like, because yeah, a lot of times like, people won't try things because they're scared of failing. But really, I mean, each failure is a success. It's kind of like, you know, when you're playing a video game where your character learns by doing. You just keep doing the things that you suck at again and again and again, because each time you do that, it's not a failure, it's a success because you gain experience. And that reflects something in the real world. You know, that like each failure actually sometimes even teaches you more than a success would tell you. A lot of people who sort of luck into success, they actually end up with less of an understanding of how the world works because they didn't fail enough to really learn every dimension of how the thing they're doing works. So we've got Clueless Atoll in the chat on Twitch is saying that they've, or maybe they're on YouTube, I actually didn't check. They're saying that they're actually studying computer science right now in college, and they're interested in getting a game job, but they're not in a program that is specifically focusing them on games, the way that yours was. And they're curious, like, is it going to be difficult for them to break in with a non-game focused degree? Are there things that you'd advise them to do, sort of, to prepare if they want to apply for a game in the game industry?
No, I don't think I don't think that it really puts you at too much of a disadvantage to just go in with some general programming like knowledge. I think you're gonna have to search out other experiences that like making games and building kind of that portfolio that we talked about briefly before, of building up examples of what you have done and how well it went or didn't go. You know, I mean, when I was interviewing here, actually, I ended up talking about some of my projects that didn't go well at all.
But learning the right lessons from it is what your interviewers would have been listening for, not
learning the right lessons and learning when you're stuck in a difficult situation, what's the best way to get out of it in a way that's going to work with like everybody that you're working with, right? And I think actually like team building and cooperation and communication are some of the most important things to learn. And I think that was kind of something that I just learned through like working with my teammates, and who end up being some of my really close friends still, that we just keep in touch. And I mean, sometimes we're like, oh, we could make another game someday, but probably not right now while we're all like trying to get actual jobs and, you know, get settled and stuff. But
yeah, totally.
And I think that, you know, if you are doing computer science, I mean, I did internships in college. I did an internship at a company that just did computer science. It wasn't a games company, but that experience helped a lot because it showed that I can work in like a proper professional environment with people, communicate, get like fix bugs, and be effective at that. And then my second internship was actually working on a game engine. So it wasn't technically working on a game, but it was working on tech around a game. So it was like, I think it's easy to want to go straight into games and directly into games and into gameplay, but that, if you're doing other jobs that are still teaching you about programming and experience and working with other people, you're still gaining valuable experience. And it kind of comes down to making sure that that's how you frame it to people when you're interviewing or like building a resume and that kind of stuff.
Oh, so right now I've got a bunch of armored zombies that I want to kill in close combat, but unfortunately, there's so many of them I can't actually get the time or the stamina. Okay, I gotta climb up on my car. No, I can't. Climb up. Why can't I climb up on my car? Okay, great. I'm gonna come over here then. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit distracted. I need to rest for a moment so that I can try to kill some of these things the way I need to for the bounty.
Yeah.
So Survivor LDG is kind of curious, and actually we've gotten similar questions from other people elsewhere too. They want to know like how much of our game is done with like C++ code by programmers like you, and how much of it is done in Blueprint, which is for those who don't know, Blueprint is a system within the Unreal Engine where it's a visual scripting system, which means that people who haven't learned a lot of code syntax are able to do certain things, certain sort of simple scripting within the game. And they're curious like where the split is and how much of the game are the programmers responsible for.
So there's quite a bit that's in blueprints, but generally when we make new features or new adjustments to features, most of that is done in code. Partially because a lot of programmers, me included, are not super fond of blueprints and the restrictions that it imposes and making sure that it communicates correctly with the actual code and such. So we try not to do it too much blueprint in for new stuff, but there are certain systems that are meant to be done like in blueprints. So like a lot of the AI stuff is done in blueprints and stuff. So it's like we try not to do too much, but there's still a good chunk of the game that is set up in blueprints and that kind of scripting.
Yeah, so the trade-off, it's a really interesting trade-off because programmer time is very valuable, and you all are very, very well-trained people with a lot of unique skills, and that means that we need to sort of use programmers in the places where we can where you guys can make the biggest difference, and so there's a split, and with most game engines, Blueprint is what Unreal uses, but most game engines that I've worked on, they've got certain things that need to be done by programmers, but then they've got simpler scripting languages in which like someone who doesn't have the skills of a programmer can do some stuff. But the trade-off is often that, because you're working in something that is not like the actual raw code, what you're doing is way less efficient. It doesn't run nearly as well. It doesn't have as many options and stuff like that. And so, like, while designers like me often like the idea that we are given power, that we can make things ourselves without having to ask a programmer's permission to make things happen, we can also mess the game up by trying to do too much with a scripting system that doesn't have the power of just raw C++ code. And we can make the game unperformant, we can make it buggy, we can make it weird, because we just don't have the skills. And so it's a weird trade-off, because you can do more if you empower your designers that way with a scripting system. You can often get a lot more done in a game than you can if you didn't have it and they were really completely programmer dependent. But there's also disadvantages to doing stuff that way.
Yeah, I think having like blueprints and visual scripting languages that non-engineers can use and interface with is very important. But I think for engineers, the way we look at it is we want to give you guys great tools, but we want to make sure that the guardrails are on. So you don't go and do something that's going to absolutely send your bowling ball into somebody else's lane and end up like crashing through stuff. So
Yeah, totally.
And do any damage.
And honestly, I appreciate the guardrails too. I do not want to be empowered to ruin the game by accident. Like that's not a thing I'm asking for. So I think ultimately we end up kind of being mostly on the same page about where those divisions should be. Let's see here. So I've got a question from Jorgen PT from Twitter. No, sorry, that's our former colleague Jürgen Tierner, and he is asking. Let's see here. He asked, "What are some valuable lessons that you've learned from working on live games?" And he also says hi. He says hi, Kat.
Well, yeah, I definitely say hi back if he's watching the stream. If he's here, I don't know if he is.
I don't know either.
But yeah, it's a great question actually, and take it with a grain of salt because this is at this company is the first time I've worked on an actual game and not like game support services and software. So I can't fully speak to the difference between it and like building a game from the ground up. But in general, things that I've learned about working on a live service game is you're going to have to deal with a lot of legacy code. And there's going to be times when you're just going to have to say, we can't do this because the system is not designed for it. And it's going to take over a year of refactoring to make it even available to do that, which means we won't be able to push anything out during that time period. So that usually just gets those things canned immediately.
Yeah. And when they don't get canned, you get something like announcing an update to Infestations early in 2022 and not seeing it until, early in 2023 because it takes a long time to plow through an old system and replace it with a new system.
Yes. And then another thing that I've learned that's really important is that when you make or planning features and changes, you want it to be different enough that it feels refreshing and invigorating to the game, but you don't want it to be different enough that it's going to cause issues or like totally ruin what made the game great in the first place, right? You have to be careful about the things you pick and the changes you make, so that you're making enough change to make it fresh and new and interesting, but you're not totally overhauling everything and like breaking everything that people have come to really enjoy or rely on in the game.
Yeah, I think you're right about that because like the particular experience of a game like State of Decay 2, it's got so many different features and systems that kind of come together like this vast Venn diagram, and the State of Decay 2 experience is a tiny little point between all of these circles. It's like balanced on a razor's edge, and it's really easy. It would be really easy to just accidentally change something that kind of breaks the balance of it and sort of breaks sort of the magic of the game. So you have to be extremely cautious. But yeah, like you said, at the same time, it's like the people come to us partly because, we're supporting this game in this ongoing way, and they like having a game that continually improves and gets better over time. So yeah, you're right. It's a balancing act. That's a really good insight. So Celeste 821 wants to know, so if it changes so quickly, how much energy do you need to invest in learning past code? I guess kind of the question is like, do you spend a lot of time like studying the way things used to work so that you can understand it, or do you sort of is that just impossible? Do you need to just sort of like take each new feature as it comes and just sort of delve into the old code when you're assigned to it?
The latter, mostly because I guess it's like been 2 years since I joined. Yeah. Even if I could have spent months getting to know the code base, and still there would be areas that I wasn't super familiar with. So it usually is better to be like, especially for like trying to deliver features and code and new things to the game, it's better to take it kind of one at a time of, okay, here's this system that I am now getting something to work on in this area, and I've never touched this area before. So it's like, okay, I am going to spend some time going through, seeing how it currently works before I start trying to make it work with what I want it to do. Which is... Yeah. It could take a while, and also we do generally when we're picking out the next bit of work that we're going to do, we do try and generally determine how long it's going to take. And if it's in an area that you haven't touched in a while, usually it's good practice to add some extra time in there to be like, this is going to be me learning, making mistakes, figuring things out, because I have no idea how it works. I can make a guess, but the guesses are usually wrong in programming is what it comes down to.
Yeah, no, and also like reading code, as I understand it, it's not like it's reading a novel or something. It's like not like you just read it and find it interesting. It's like you have to kind of be looking for something. You have to have a purpose in order to really get something out of it. Otherwise, yeah, just sitting there reading it is just like, it sounds like the most boring thing in the entire world.
If you just sit there and you read it and it's not relevant to something you're trying to accomplish, more likely than not, you're gonna forget everything about it until the time when you come back and it is relevant to what you need to know. So
I'm just gonna. Okay, so I'm gonna see if I can. So far, I've done a really bad job of trying to kill a Juggernaut with a pistol because I keep killing them other ways first. So I'm gonna try not to do that this time. I'm just gonna kill the other zombies that are coming after me. Oh crap! So what I'm gonna try to do is hit this guy. Come on, there we go. Hit him with my heavy weapon. Oh, but my plan was also to dodge him, which I failed to do. Ah! Oh, let's see here. I'm gonna see if I can actually read a question while I'm doing this. Oh, actually, the thing you were bringing up about, sort of like having there be certain areas of the game that you're really familiar with and others that you're not. We actually, when I asked people for questions for you, a lot of them asked questions about AI specifically, like, what's involved in making really good NPC companion AI, or what are the challenges involved in sort of making hordes work. And I know that AI is not your area, but I'm wondering, like, is there something you can tell us about those problems, or is there something you can tell us about, like, what it's like to work in a brand new area that isn't yours?
Yeah, I think I can touch a little bit on both. Specifically for AI, I'm not a subject expert at all in AI. I did like one major project relating to a couple of AI. I think I did one where I made an AI that plays poker, and it did okay. Nice. It didn't do fantastic. It didn't win all the time, but it did okay. And then I did some AI. Well, I attempted to do some AI for a college project where I was trying to code like AI drivers for bumper cars. That didn't go so well because it turns out trying to understand the AI that you're gonna need to make something work in a game that is very fundamentally around knockback and physics is extraordinarily difficult because of trying to figure out how to get them to build up enough momentum to actively be effective and that kind of thing. But AI is a very tricky thing, and I think one of the main tricky things about it is that you kind of have to have all of these variables. Let's say there's you take an NPC AI follower out with you to go clear an infestation or something, right? And so you have, let's say, a crossbow and a sidearm of a pistol, and they have a shotgun or something, and so you're going in stealthy. So, okay, what do we want the follower to do? We want the follower to be stealthy, follow your lead, right? We don't want them to ruin it for you. So they're not going to shoot their gun, right? And then it's okay, but what if I'm shooting my gun? Does that mean it's okay for them to shoot their gun? And it was you could say yes, but then it's but my gun is silenced, or I'm using a crossbow and theirs is not silenced. Do we check for that and do different things because of that? So there's a whole bunch of, that was a super simple example that doesn't even scratch the surface of what we actually have to check. But because we have to do all of these checks and verify that they're being useful, but they're not being too useful. They're not taking away all of the enjoyment from the player by being too good at defeating zombies, right? So it's a very difficult thing, both design-wise and to actually implement from a coding and mechanical perspective. And I think there was a question about hordes too. Hordes are really difficult because of their navigation and nav meshes, which is basically this thing that exists in games that tells you where and and where you can't walk and move and jump and stuff, is this very complex thing that also is usually really, really big, especially the bigger your game is. And so it's really hard to load all of that at one time. So it's like, how do we make sure that a horde across the map is navigating correctly when you're nowhere near them, and therefore the navigation mesh doesn't really exist because it's kind of not there. So it's very, there's a lot of small things that can go wrong, and there's not an usually particularly easy way to figure out what's causing issues and how to resolve them. And sometimes you can figure out what's causing the issue, but you don't know how to resolve it in a way that is the clearly the best way to resolve it, you know?
Yeah,
There's
totally.
a lot of,
And like when you were talking about things like the the factors that play into the decisions that your NPC companion makes. A lot of times, there'll be a lot of factors in play all at the same time, and like they could get, you could make a simple rule like, oh yeah, if the player's making noise, the AI can make noise. But then maybe there's a different situation that overlaps that says, no, actually the NPC should not be making noise. Oh wait, no, they should. Oh wait, no, they shouldn't. And then you have to figure out how they decide those complicated things. Like there's always, in real life, when you're playing with your friends, the human brain is really good at coming up with just making up answers to arbitrary random questions that it's never thought of before. And AI can't do that. It just has to follow rules. You have to think of every possible rule in advance.
yeah, I think that's the most difficult thing, is you kind of have to seem like you see in the future a little bit to try and get AI to be good and not seem either really stupid or really obviously all of them doing the same AI, right? So
Yeah.
it's a very complex thing, and it is definitely one of those sections of game development where to do it properly, you have to mostly focus on that, and you can't really focus on other things as much because there are so many factors that you already have to consider, you know?
Yeah. So Vinbo Zinbo is curious about the infestation update, which your team is currently working on. He's curious if players who have had the same community and the same map for a really, really long time, even going back to the beginnings of the game, is there anything specific that you have to worry about when you're sort of implementing a new feature that affects the way that maps work? Should players be worried that if they've been in the game for a long time, there are going to be special weird bugs they run into that no one else runs into?
We try our best to get rid of as many bugs and weirdness as we can, and to account for people having, anytime we change something, we have to try and account for the fact that players have it set up in a different way because that's how it used to work, or this test thing got put in and then somebody somehow got access to it when they weren't supposed to. I think there's a recurring bug that we have where outfit items won't unlock, and they can be stored in the supply locker because they just didn't unlock, and that's a really weird bug that we've mostly fixed, but then it was causing a crash. I think it was back when Forever Communities came out.
Yeah, that's right.
Because we were like, well, this shouldn't ever happen, and then we did some other change, and then because of those weird bug states, it was you can't do this anymore because this is not a valid thing to be in here. And we're like, well, I don't know how it got in there in the first place, but so
yeah, because that bug started way back when we first did the outfits update, which was was that a single digit update to the game? It was a long time ago, and then we fixed it and stopped it from happening. Stop new instances of it from happening a long time ago. And so internally it feels like that problem is just solved, and so it's easy to just stop thinking about it. But if a player never kept that in their game, they had experienced the bug literal years ago and then never removed that item from their supply locker, then they've still got that little bug maker just waiting for something to go wrong. And so so it's it almost feels in order to hedge against that happening, we would have to test our new updates with almost every single version of the game that's ever been out, which is just not possible. That's not even it's saves from every version.
Our QA team is great, and they do fantastic work, and they catch so much before it ever gets out to the players. But again, you'd have to be like probably more than human to catch some of the stuff that manages to sneak in there because of how many like iterations back the bug could have like come from, or the fact that it's this very rare occurrence. If these two things coincide at the exact same time, something's gonna happen. So, I think there's so many bugs that we can fix, or new features that we can fix, and it won't affect like old saves, and it'll just easily integrate with all of that. And there are some stuff where it's like, we are fundamentally changing things, and we're trying to make it work as well as possible as it can with old ones, but to a point, it's the old, if it's not working, turn it off and back on again, of like, a fresh start is always going to be a less buggy experience for just about like anything that gets implemented.
Yeah, and I think we actually had a specific question about that at one point. I think it's scrolled back now. I don't think I can see it anymore. But yeah, somebody was asking if you would prefer to work on a brand new feature from scratch with absolutely nothing and a blank page, or if you would rather work on a feature that already works and you're making refinements to something that is already known to be fun.
Well, I think both of them are fun in their own way, right? Because working on something that already exists and improving it and refining it and kind of, Eric has been on a couple of these streams, and he said something that's that I always really liked, is that for a lot of these features that we've done, like Plague Territory and Infestations and these kind of systematic revamps, are things that was originally kind of, slightly different in certain respects, but was the general idea was to be more along the lines of how they are now. But we ran out of time when we were first launching the game, and so now we actually get to go back and kind of improve those systems and kind of bring them to where we always wanted them to be.
Yeah, it is really fun for me, even not being on the team, like watching the work that you all are doing, because so much of what you're doing is sort of bringing to fruition a lot of the thoughts that like the early team and I had that we just didn't have the time to implement. And so seeing you all get to do it is actually really kind of satisfying for me to watch from afar. Even though I'm not on the team, it's like yes, you're making the infestations work the way that we hoped that they would, and you're making forever communities work the way that we always imagined that that players were going to want. And so yeah, so that's really fun to see.
Yeah, so like that's always really cool. But then also like making something entirely from scratch does give you more options and more freedom and more ability to kind of have more say in the design of how things are going to work and what they can do and stuff. But it does come with more risk because you have to make it all yourself, and there's not existing framework that is going to work. There's not like a before versus after, there's only really an after. So you have to make sure it is working the way that you want it to work and properly, and that it's a little scary, it's a little intimidating and nerve-wracking, at least for me it is, to totally design something up from nothing, because that's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, you're right about the challenges of evaluating something like that. By the way, I've got now the producer, I've got the M9, and I think the other thing I unlocked is not an object. So yeah, I completed the bounties that I set off at the beginning. But yeah, the point that you're making is really good because yeah, like a lot of the time, when you're just making something brand new from scratch, you don't know what its potential is. Like you got this concept, and sometimes you've got like someone who's really passionate pushing it, saying, "No, this is going to be the most amazing thing. It's going to have this effect and that effect," and then you make it, and it might be a little disappointing. But you're like, "Wait, is it disappointing because it was always a bad idea, or did we just do it wrong?" Or you don't know. You just got nothing to compare it to. But when you're refining something that already is out there, you know if you've made an improvement or not. Like it's much easier to tell. And if there's an audience that's already playing the game that you can share it with, and this is another one of my favorite experiences working on a live game, is the fact that you've already got an audience out there and they can give you immediate feedback on like you get to feel the joy of them liking something that you built immediately, rather than having to wait for years for it to come out. Or if they don't like it, you also find out real fast, and it gives you the chance to change it, and there's no sort of uncertainty about it. So yeah, no, I think you're right.
Yeah, I think it's there's Oh, I totally lost my train of thought. I was gonna
That's
say
okay.
something. I'm sure it was probably profound, you know.
So Zachary Morris wants to know, what about State of Decay 2 has been the most fun for you to program? Like, which part of the game that you've worked on has been the most fun for you?
So, okay, so recently we've been working on the infestation changes in the PTR, right? And one of the main things that we've kind of introduced with the second iteration of it being in the PTR was to add the ability to add like these kind of defenses to outposts to kind of help adjust and make it easier to handle these new, much more aggressive infestations. And my favorite part has always, I feel like this is just going to be the case until I get the chance to do something similar, but I was making the landmines, like the outpost landmine traps that you can set up like on your outpost, and just getting that to work the first time and then going in to test it and like dragging a bunch of bloaters into like the edge of the outpost zone and watching them go up in like this great fireworks show was such a satisfying experience, and just really like scratched my brain, right? I was like, that is amazing.
That's awesome. That actually reminds me, like one of my best experiences, like early on in my work on State of Decay, was when I was working on Lifeline, and we implemented a similar thing around Black Friday, around like the big base in Lifeline, where it's like it was just an area, like a big invisible cube, where whenever a zombie was inside of it, periodically we would check and roll a die to see if the zombie would explode. And so, like, depending on where we set it, they would just be this fireworks show of zombies just running through a minefield. And it was really, really satisfying. So I'm really looking forward. I haven't been playing in the PTR, so I'm really looking forward to seeing to getting in there and seeing what that's like.
Yeah, they have more work to be done. There's a bunch of polish work that I want to do, but I really enjoyed that, and also I was kind of I took a little bit more responsibility. I was doing a little bit more of the design around like the outpost defense stuff. So I was also extraordinarily proud of it for that reason as well.
Actually, that is one of the advantages that I've found of like working on a smaller team, is the fact that each member of the team gets to have like a lot more like ownership over what they're working on. Like if you're on a big team of like hundreds of people, usually, you know, the job that's handed to you is just like, here, make this one little cog in this one little machine work, and you don't get this sense of like, this is mine. But you know, on a team that's got, you know, that's got a small number of people and very few designers, like each person to some degree or another is a designer of what they're working on, and you get a lot more ownership over what you build. I think that's really, I enjoy being on small teams for that reason.
Yeah, it's really it gives you the opportunity to really have your kind of, you get to touch a lot of things, and you also get to have a say in a lot of stuff, which is really cool.
So Akina Shark wants to know, this might be actually a really similar question, but I was curious if there's anything that you've worked on State of Decay 2 that really felt like it just went really swimmingly, if it just went exactly the way you wanted, or if that just literally never happens.
I don't know if that ever really happens in programming. Also, anytime it does happen, it just makes me incredibly suspicious. I think there was this one time I was working with one of our designers, Randy, and I was like, he's like, oh, I'm having this really weird issue. And I was like, okay, I'm going to look into it from a code perspective while you look into it from a design perspective. And we'll try and meet in the middle and see if we can figure it out. And he was like, okay, so I changed some things here and now it works, but I don't know why. And I looked at it and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm looking at the code. That doesn't make any sense. Why that would work? And he's like, but it works. And I was like, I kind of hate that it works because that means we still don't know what happened.
Yeah.
But so.
And that's the point where you basically, you'll sort of like, complete the task in Jira or check in the bug in Jira or whatever, but like you put a bunch of extra notes saying, hey tester, I don't think this should work. Please just destroy this if you can. Break it, because like, yeah, it just, oftentimes like the test team is sort of your last line of defense with that kind of thing. When you don't know why something broke, you don't know how you fixed it, you know something is going to go wrong, but you need somebody to help you figure out what's up. Okay,
and sometimes you just can't figure it out. So
and so it just eventually ships, and you're like, cross your fingers, knock on wood, you know. And if it never breaks down, then you're like, good. Well, I guess the code leprechauns are on my side today, and just sort of magically made it work for us.
Yeah.
So we have only got like 5 minutes left. I'm curious if
Oh, wow.
there's anything that we was that was an hour. Isn't that weird?
That's crazy.
So are there any like sort of like, I don't know, last words you have, or like things that, you know, like last piece of advice to anyone who wants to, you know, break in and be a game programmer, or, you know, things you're excited about that are upcoming on State of Decay 2? Just anything you want to say?
For people who want to be gameplay programmers, it's going to be scary. You're going to question whether or not you're going to make it, and it can be really frustrating, but if you really are enjoying it, and if you do find those moments, those eureka moments of everything's clicking together and it feels so good, don't give up on it, because your luck will break.
Honestly, like, I can't think of a better way to wrap up the stream than with that. Thank you so much, Kat, for coming in here and talking to everybody. I mean, your insights into this whole thing have been great. I'm sure there's a lot of viewers out there who've learned a lot and sort of felt inspired by the stories and the advice that you gave. So I really, really appreciate you coming on here and being our guest.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you to everybody in the chat for coming in.
We will definitely have to do this again sometime. And speaking of doing this again, our next stream is going to be on January 23rd. Joe Swarner is going to be on with another guest from the State of Decay 2 team, and they're going to be talking through the feedback that we've received in the PTR about the Infestations update and what the team is going to be doing about it. So that's going to be a really fun and informative stream, so definitely show up for that. Thank you all in the chat for participating, everybody on social media who contributed questions. It's been wonderful. And I guess we will leave you with that. After 20 seconds of awkwardness at the end of the YouTube video.
Oh yeah, I was warned about this.
Yeah, this last bit. We never know what to say. There's going to be some links appearing on the screen. You can click on them if you want to. I don't know.
Cats didn't show up for the live stream.